Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is On Dog Terms. I'm your host, MJ. I'm here with my co host, Sam. And today we're talking about reinforcement. Sam, what is reinforcement?
There's two forms of reinforcement in what we call the quadrants of dog training. There's four quadrants, but within that, there's reinforcement and then there's punishment. There's two forms of reinforcement. The first one is positive reinforcement, and the second one is negative reinforcement.
With positive reinforcement, or we're adding something to make a behavior more likely to happen, a really easy example is going to be giving a dog a treat, right? So you
Mhm.
ask a dog to sit, you give them a treat because they like food. That makes them want to sit again. But what's another example that you can think of?
You can give them a scratch, little pet, pat on the head, pat on the butt. You can give them a toy. You can utilize in terms of like radius or space. You can use that as a reward to a dog. Dogs who find that they have like a bigger personal bubble, oftentimes you
Yeah.
can manipulate how close you are to them or how close they are to something.
We are going to go in detail on all those, but just basically summing it up that you're giving something to a dog or you're adding something to their environment. Negative reinforcement. So when we're taking something away to make a behavior more likely to happen, that's a little harder for a lot of people to understand. So what's an easy example of that?
A good example or an easy example is sometimes as simple as leash pressure. When you apply pressure on the leash to enforce the dog to sit or enforce them to be in a relaxed or lay down position, the removal of that pressure is a reward. And a real life example is what we as humans we deal with negative reinforcement every day is shade or sun. When you're in the blaring heat of the sun, it feels really uncomfortable on your skin. Everything starts to feel really yucky. And then the moment you move into shade, that uncomfort is immediately taken away just by the act of moving into the shade. So you have removed the uncomfortable feeling by doing that. So the shade becomes reinforcing. So
Yeah.
that's the removal of the sun is the reinforcement there in that example.
Another example that I really like that I think my clients seem to understand very well is that your car uses negative reinforcement with you
Mm.
every day. So when you get into your car and you don't put your seatbelt on, your car wants you to put the seatbelt on. So it starts
Yeah.
beeping at you.
And I
And
know
that
you don't.
beeping, yeah, it's really annoying. It's not scary and you know what it is and how to turn it off. So to turn it off, you put on your seatbelt. The car stops beeping at you and that's your reward. That annoying sound goes away to reward you for putting on your seatbelt. And if you're anything like me, like at this point, I honestly don't remember the last time I got into my car and didn't put on my seatbelt because my car has just trained me to avoid
Yeah.
that annoying noise altogether by putting on my seatbelt. So we're going to get into all of this a little more in detail to teach people how to use reinforcement for their dog. But I figured we'd start with just very simply explaining the difference between reinforcement and punishment. Because
Mm.
punishment is one of those big, scary words in the dog training world right now that gets a lot of
Yeah.
stigma about it. But to keep it super, super simple for people, reinforcement builds a behavior or creates a new behavior, and punishment gets rid of a behavior.
Yes.
Scientifically speaking, you can't get rid of a behavior with reinforcement. You can build a different behavior, and we'll get into that too a little later. But let's use jumping as an example. I can't reinforce a dog to not jump. I can
Right.
reinforce them to sit politely. So you're building a different behavior instead of necessarily addressing the jumping head on. Whereas punishment, and this is not the episode where we're going to get into how to do that or any of that, because that's a big topic. But punishment is when you're isolating the jumping behavior and you're trying to get rid of that without
Right.
necessarily building a different behavior. So, just to keep it simple so people understand, when we're talking about reinforcement, we're talking about creating behaviors, building behaviors. Now,
Yeah.
you had kind of touched on it, but in a nutshell, what we can use as reinforcement is basically anything that the dog likes or wants, right?
Sure.
So that can be food, play, toys, affection, space.
It could be the crazy lady that lets her chow hump her leg because it feels really
Yeah.
good when he does an agility jump the right way or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that, but some people would allow that.
Mhm. It could be sniffing the grass. Like my shepherd's
Yes.
favorite thing on a walk is to sniff the grass. Sure, he likes food, he likes toys, he likes affection, loves sniffing the grass. So
Mhm.
when we're talking about training our dogs, a lot of people they only think of food as a reward they can use for their dog. But there's so many things that your dog finds rewarding, whether you intend them to or not, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So anything your dog wants is basically what reinforcement is. So Let's think of some examples, Sam, to help people better understand where dogs can get reinforced unintentionally or where they can get reinforced for behaviors we don't necessarily like.
Mhm.
So in the dog world, we call these self-rewarding behaviors. Jumping is one of them, but what are
Yeah.
some other ones?
Self self-rewarding behaviors, that is an intrinsic desire the dog has to act within that behavior. They might not necessarily get anything out of it from the environment. They like nothing tangible, but it feels good. So it's hard because all dogs are a little different. But another example, chewing. Chewing on things is a really natural self-rewarding behavior.
For some dogs, pulling on the leash feels good. Like we
Digging.
see this a lot with those dogs that are bred to pull things, like to pull carts or pull sleds. Pulling feels good.
Yeah.
Digging feels good. It's usually when we look back at like what an animal is and the things they would need to do to survive, a lot of those behaviors that feel good are things they would need to do to survive, right?
Sure.
Like playing feels good, but when we look at things from a scientific standpoint, animals play when they're young to learn how to fight, how to catch prey, how to survive, right?
Right.
Digging is going to help dogs find food or stay warm or, depending on the scenario. So there's usually it's just those behaviors that naturally feel good to a dog. Sometimes it's behaviors that are natural to a dog but aren't natural to us. So like some people really don't like when their dog licks their face, but that's a
Yep.
natural communication thing for dogs.
Yep. I was
Or
just going to mention barking and licking because a lot of
Mhm.
times we get annoyed with the over amounts that our dogs bark at things. There's many reasons why dogs bark, and we can go into a whole subcategory about that. Yeah. But barking and licking, those feel good. The action and the expression of the behavior gives the dogs dopamine on a certain level. And some dogs, they can get endorphins from that too. And that endorphins versus dopamine is a super interesting topic we can go into another day. But sniffing and barking, or licking and barking, are another two things that people tend to overlook.
we'll break down all the things we can think of as
Yeah.
reinforcers and go a little more in detail with them. So right off the bat, the obvious, clear, maybe obvious isn't the best word, but the one that's most common that people think of is food. And we're actually not going to go too in detail in that in this episode because our next episode is going to be all about how to use food in training. And we'll probably go really, really in depth in that one. But food is an example. We often think our dog's food motivated or they're not. Some dogs like certain types of food. Some dogs
Mhm.
don't like food that much at all. Sometimes if your dog doesn't feel good and you're trying to shove a cookie in their face and they don't want it because they don't feel good, that might not actually be rewarding to a dog. So food can be rewarding, but its value is going to vary a bit. And we'll do that one next. But play. Let's talk about play versus toys. Is there a difference there?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I think of toys and play, I think of them as two different things. Like
Mhm.
my German Shepherd, he likes to have things.
Mhm.
So sometimes he doesn't necessarily want you to play with the toy with him. He just wants to have the toy. And I know a lot of dogs that are like that.
Yeah.
So just giving them a toy to play with on their own or to possess can be a reward. Whereas play is usually you and your dog or your dog and another dog interacting in a game of some kind. Some dogs really
Yeah.
like that. That one I don't think is used enough as a reward in dog training. I think that one is a lot of fun and could help a lot of people with a lot of things. Talk to me about play because you're really into training with play.
Yeah. I do a lot of play with toys more often than I would say like I roughhouse or play or tumble with my dogs that way. My two Malinois, uh, shit gets real serious real quick when we start roughhousing. So I have to limit and control the rules, boundaries, and limitations that I allow within play because some dogs, like two older dogs, if they mouth me or put teeth on skin, it's not really gonna hurt me and I can move on with my life. But when my two mouths give me teeth hugs, it hurts. So I stick to toys and things that we can compete to or compete against because they are dogs that naturally find competition really fulfilling. We do a lot of tug. Tug is my absolute favorite game to play. There's so much you can teach dogs mental skills within the arousal and the game aspect of chase the toy, play with the toy, tug for the toy, um, chew on the toy, all of those things. You can get so many intrinsic behaviors to feel good just through the act of being able to use something that feels good. So, for example, like their mouth, they like to bite things. When you get them to do a behavior and then they get to nail a tug and then bite something and get a little bit of their frustration and angst out you get a level 10 type of obedience or energy towards that behavior because you're giving a level 10 reward. And that's another thing about using your reinforcement wisely. There's higher value and lower value. And within toys and play, there is that as well. But being able to manipulate and control how much reinforcement they're given through novelty of the item as well, because the dog in excess of too much play, too much toy, not enough like learning how to chill. There's too much going into that toy or energy into that behavior attached to the toy. You get a dog who is so ballistic in their brain and explosive in their brain, they're not really thinking. So sometimes using that kind of reward for certain dogs, like a tug toy or a tug game, isn't going to be the most effective. Understanding what that reinforcement is, where it gets you within the behavior, and then how you can manipulate your training plan around that too.
Yeah. And sometimes, because I do a lot of play training, particularly with my reactive dogs that I work with, I
Mhm.
like training with play. And sometimes I'll ask people, oh, does your dog like to play? And they'll just say, no, not really. And to me, that's a big red flag because if your dog
Totally.
doesn't like to play, something else is wrong. We got to fix. But
Mhm.
sometimes people assume that their dog won't be able to use play as a reward because they're not really that into play, but their dog actually doesn't know how to play. Like your
They don't
dog
know how to
can't
play with their
decide that they
dog.
don't like tug if they don't know how to play tug with you, right? And that sounds
Mhm.
so simple, but sometimes dogs don't. Especially I see this a lot when dogs are puppies. Sometimes we accidentally they have something and we're like, no, 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 like spit it out. And even if it's a
Yep.
toy, we're like, give it to me. And we really emphasize the drop it, that we don't teach them it's okay to compete with us over a toy sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes your dog doesn't know what the game is. And that means that we have to teach them what the game is. So then we know if they like it or not. But play is definitely an option there for reinforcement. Affection is another one, but affection is probably one that I think people want to use more than it is actually usable. Because a lot
Yes.
of dogs, while they like affection, it's not enough that they'll work for it. Or some dogs actually don't like affection that much. And then
Mhm.
they actually don't want to come near you. Like I think I talked about this in another episode already, but I had this one client where they couldn't get the dog to come to them. And when I would watch what would happen when the dog would come to them, they'd reach their hand over her head and pet her. And she
Yeah.
absolutely hated that. So she didn't want to come to them because she didn't want to get pet. So affection is one too, where some dogs don't like it enough. Like they like it, but not enough to work for it. Some dogs
Right.
really don't like it and it can hurt their work ethic. But then on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have dogs that like it way too much that it creates over arousal and they're overstimulated and now they can't think and they're too crazy. And
Yes.
then you have to be really careful with your affection because you're imping them up by accident. What about space? You had mentioned space earlier, could be a reward.
Yeah, every dog, just like humans, we all have our own little personal boundary. I think of it as like a permanent 6 foot COVID boundary that everyone kind of always has. And some people find when their boundaries are encroached, that is a little bit more disrespectful than other people who don't mind strangers being in their space or passing by them quickly or being really close face to face talking to a person or whatever. But dogs are the same way. And you can utilize space for dogs who are sensitive and who do require bigger boundaries. You can use that as getting closer to the thing that makes them uncomfortable. In fact, actually pulls them away from the thing when they make good choices. And that's a blanket explanation. We can go into like how that is actually applied when we're doing that in training, but it's interesting to manipulate it that way because you can teach the dog the closer you get, the farther you can get away to it, as long as you overcome it.
Yeah.
So that could be dogs who don't like passing dogs on a tight sidewalk. Giving them more space will help them be successful and help them make better choices when presented with a struggle or a temptation. It could be because it could be aggression, it could be reactivity, or it could just be excitement. Either way, adding space is a way that you can reinforce behaviors from a distance as well.
Oh, I remember one time I had taken my German Shepherd, who he is dog reactive. He's not a big fan of strange dogs in his space. I had taken him to a seminar once, and I had him on a place board, like on laying down on his cot next to me, and somebody else's dog. They dropped the leash. The dog runs over and gets in his space, and he did not react yet. So I used my marker word that we'll talk about later, and I rewarded him by moving him away from that dog. Like, you
Mhm.
did so good. You tolerated that. And granted, it happened over a couple of seconds. So people would be like, oh, he didn't even have a chance to react. Well, that's what I wanted. But
Right.
his reward for not instantly just freaking out was that I'm going to move him away from that dog. So space can definitely be a reward for dogs who are overwhelmed and they're feeling like if they're pushed any farther, they will make a bad choice if they haven't made
Right.
one yet.
Right.
So it's definitely how we can use space. Sniffing is a reward too, where you can use it intentionally, and not a lot of people do. So let's say you go on a walk with your dog. There's something called the Premack principle that I want to talk about in a little bit. But some people, they use sniffing as a reward on a walk. Okay, you're doing great, go sniff. But a lot of people don't realize that they let their dog drag them and sniff a whole walk. And the dog is
Right.
being rewarded for pulling because they get to sniff the grass. And that is where management and training comes in, where we go, no, you can't sniff the grass if you're going to be a jerk on the leash. But most people, they don't even realize that their dog is being rewarded because sniffing the grass is so much fun.
Yep. And that's what walks are for, right? It's an interaction for your dog with the environment, and they're a little social media check-in. They get to check and see what dog peed on that fire hydrant yesterday and whatever. But when that behavior, the self-rewarding behavior, overrides how much they care or don't care about your training or your rules, or you just trying to simply to get their attention, that's when there's an error in our processor within human to dog straight through that leash. There is an error in that moment. And the sniffing on the walk isn't inherently bad. It is what is being reinforced through that act of sniffing. So are they
Mhm.
learning they can blow off your recall or your check-in word? Are you continuously letting them pull while saying stop pulling, stop pulling? They're not learning it that way. So there's definitely a lot that goes into what is being reinforced by accident. When we are giving our dogs what is natural and what is desired for them, walking and sniffing as natural functions that make dogs feel good. So that's another thing to think about, how we can change walks while still giving them exactly what they need every day, but still getting what we want out of it as well. We
Yeah.
expect a loose leash, or we want at least don't drag me down the street. I don't even care if your dog's in a heel. I don't care if you want them in front of you or behind, as long as the dog is engaged, the dog can sniff, and the dog can check out on things when asked to. And don't
Yep.
hyper focus on things that they shouldn't. And, everyone has different rules for their walks and such, but as long as the rules that you have in place, your dog can comply with, let them sniff.
Yeah. Oh, freedom is another one too that can be used as a
Mhm.
reward. So, like when I used to live out in Colorado near you and we'd go hiking with the dogs off leash, my rule was you have to be under control, right? Like
Right.
the freedom to be off leash and run around in the forest is your reward for healing with me from the
Yes.
car to where it's appropriate to let you off leash.
Yes.
For coming back when I call you, it's not as immediate as when we think of food. Like the moment my dog's butt hits the ground, I can give them a cookie. But freedom can be a reward too. If you're not going to come back when I call you, that freedom is revoked. Things like
Yes.
that. So we've talked about all of the different rewards. We've talked about self-rewarding behaviors. Let's talk about how to actually use reinforcement to train your
Yeah.
dog, which is easier said than done, right? So first, people have to figure out what their dog finds valuable. And I don't think that's as simple as people think it is, because that means you have to figure out what your dog finds valuable, even if it's not coming from you.
Yeah.
So that
That's a
is where
hard thing for people to swallow.
it is. You are not always the most interesting thing out there. I want you to try really, really hard to be. Yeah, but you're not. You're not always going to win that competition. So when we're using food, which we'll talk about next time, you have to figure out what kind of food your dog likes. Because if somebody was trying to reward me with salad, I'm not going to do a whole lot of work for them. But if they're offering me a piece of cheesecake, I'll work for that. Whereas, like, I know some people that don't like cheesecake and they won't work for that. So every dog is different in terms of food, but also you're figuring out, does your dog like affection enough to work for it? Yep. Do they want space from things? Do they like to sniff the grass? Do they like to run around off leash, or do they want to follow you? Like, there's all these different things that people have to figure out what their dog finds valuable.
Yeah.
And you also have to know, something that drives me insane is when people get a rescue dog. I'm not ending my sentence there, folks, so keep listening. But when people will get like a rescue dog that's, it's not a tiny little puppy and they know nothing about this dog. And on the very first day of having the dog, they take it off leash on a hike, on a trail. You have no idea if that dog likes to chase rabbits into the road,
Yeah.
if they like to pester other dogs, if they like to scare the crap out of old ladies that are running away from them, if they like to swim. Like, I know when I take my shepherd off leash on the trails around here. We have a lot of water out here. We're right on the beach, but there's also ponds and rivers and streams and stuff. He's a good dog. He's trained, but as when I know we're near water, I'm a little more aware of him because he loves the water and he will try to run into it. And it's not always safe to do so. So I'm aware of that. Whereas if you know, don't pay attention to those things with your dog or you hardly know your dog yet, you don't know that your dog will choose the food you have in your pocket over running into the pond, running into the
Yeah.
road to chase the rabbit, going after the other dog that they see, things like that. So people really need to, before they even start training their dog, figure out what their dog likes and what their dog doesn't like.
I think our expectations that every dog should just want to listen because that's what dog does to man or dog
Mhm.
does for man. But that's not always the case. And I think a good way that people can test that on their own, like whether you've had your dog for 2 years, 10 years, and you don't really know what your dog finds value in, put yourself and your dog in a sterile room, shut the door, put a bowl of food and some toys and just some different things that they can go interact with. Maybe something new that they've never seen, maybe something scary, like the vacuum is kind of an example. Just things that they can interact with and and they can get information from, and then try to get your dog's attention. What is your dog more interested in the smell of the carpet in the room? Is your dog just going to go sit in the corner and be like, no, what are we doing here? This is dumb. Like, there's so many different ways that you can test that, but that's a good example and seeing what your dog will naturally find interest in. If they immediately look to you like, what are we doing here? Then you know
Mhm.
you have a dog that's engaged with you versus so absorbed in what's going on around you and them
Mhm.
that they choose that versus you.
Yeah. When I used to take Grim, I mean, I still take him off leash a lot, but when we lived in Colorado, there was just never ending space out there. So we go off leash way out at the beach, but we're not going on like off leash hikes like we used to because it's just so crowded.
Mhm.
But when we were in Colorado and I let him off leash, and my clients would see the videos that I would post of us, him frolicking off leash in the wilderness. They'd be like, oh, that's great that you can trust him off leash. He must have a really good recall. Yes, he did. But I'm going to be honest, I didn't ever have to use it because he
Right.
didn't want to leave me. Like I
Right.
have one video that I took out in Colorado that I love where he's off leash and we're on a little trail. We're in Durango and I'm trying to mess with him. And I'm letting him walk ahead and he keeps looking at me. And finally I find the perfect opportunity where when he's not looking and he goes around a corner just ahead of me, I duck behind a tree and I hide. And
Mhm.
it took him 3 seconds to come back and find me because being near me is very valuable. So that by itself is rewarding, which is super nice for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do think there's a bit of relationship building that is responsible for that, but I also just think I got really lucky. And I think he's naturally also that way. Whereas
Yeah.
some dogs,
That's something I wanted to pinpoint as you were talking about that. There's dogs who will naturally, even if you don't have a great recall, say it's a new rescue dog, new ish, whatever. I don't even care the circumstances with it. Like to paint this dog, it doesn't matter. This dog and person go out together. Person doesn't have great recall on with their dog, but still lets them off leash, and the dog still listens. Like they've never formally given a dog a treat for coming back within petting distance or making them sit in our space after saying come. Like they've never done anything formal, but their dog just doesn't go anywhere. That doesn't mean your dog is completely off leash trustworthy. That also could just mean your dog is scared to make choices outside of a radius that you are not within. Therefore, they're going to stay within that comfort zone. That doesn't mean you have a trustworthy off leash dog 100% of the time. It could just mean you don't have a dog that is trusting themselves to make decisions because they constantly need their comfort, right? The person, the thing that they makes them feel most comfortable, which yes can be an alternate way to getting off leash control, but it's that's rooted within fear with the dog rather than the conscious effort of leaving that reward in the environment alone and staying with us. Where
yeah,
you have the benefit, you have a shepherd. He wants to be up your butt all the
it is
time.
handler oriented, which
Right.
it's not always fear. So, I mean, yes, the fearful dogs are not going to leave you because you're the
Right.
safe person,
Right.
but sometimes genetics play a role. And this is where, like we've already talked about in a previous episode, expectations, realistic expectations for your dog.
Mhm.
There are certain breeds that are going to be much more what we call handler oriented. They want to
Mhm.
interact with their human and be near their human and work with their human because that breed was bred to do so. And that makes training them a lot easier. It makes getting them off leash reliable significantly easier. It doesn't mean that they're off leash reliable just because they like to hang out with you. But there are also some breeds that are the opposite and they're bred to be very independent and they don't want anything to do with you. Yep. Think your livestock guardians,
I was just
your
going to say that.
hounds. Hounds want to follow their nose. You are nothing
Mhm.
compared to their nose. It's possible to off leash train these dogs, but it's a lot harder. It raises your
100%.
eyebrows up.
Yeah. I mean, I just met recently two people with Pyrenees or livestock guardian mixes that would like to be able to, who don't do well on a leash and bark and lunge and freak out at other dogs. Not the most surprised by that, but they want to be able to get these dogs to hike and do off leash hikes with their families and such. And I'm to give too much realistic expectations, that's probably not going to be accomplishable without tools involved and tools for a long time within that dog's life, within the realm of that freedom that you're trying to give them. I don't, a hound and like a natural guard dog or a livestock guardian dog like that, you would be very hard pressed to have a reinforcement 100% readily available all the time that they will choose you over that
Mhm.
thing that they find more reinforcing and naturally good is is going to be very difficult.
Yeah. So
Not impossible.
we can do a whole episode on recall. I just wrote that down, so we'll do that later. But a lot of people think that teaching your dog to come when called every single time is as simple as teaching a come command, and it's not. It is the relationship you have with your dog, the expectations that you've set with your dog, the history of how your dog has been allowed to interact with you. It is really, really, really relationship building. So, particularly when we have those dogs that are not handler oriented, it is a lot of work behind the scenes and the building blocks to get that reliable recall. All right. So, we've talked about how to figure out what your dog finds rewarding and why that's important. And now let's talk about when we're using reinforcement, timing matters quite a bit. Timing is really important. So, in training, we use something called markers. Maybe you call them marker words if you're using verbals. You could use something like a click with a clicker. But markers basically mark the moment that your dog does the behavior that you're choosing to reward, or you're choosing the moment. That is the thing that reinforcement is going to happen because of. Right. So for me in my training, the marker words that I use yes. Yes basically means that's exactly what I wanted. Now that behavior is done and you're getting a reward from me. So we can go into marker words, not, really in detail, but essentially you just want a way to tell your dog that thing, that exact thing that you just did. That is why this reinforcement is happening.
Mhm.
So when it comes to timing, let's say we're teaching a puppy how to sit. Timing is really important because if your timing is not correct, your dog is going to not quite understand what you want them to do. Right. So let's say we're teaching a puppy how to sit. If you say sit and then you start to lure your puppy into a sit, and right before their butt hits the ground, you give them a cookie, they're going to think that sit means do some weird crouch thing.
Hmm.
And if you get your puppy to sit and they don't know what sit means yet, and you wait 5 to 10 seconds and then you give them a treat, they're like, that's cool. I got a treat, but I have no idea what it's for because they don't even know what sit means yet. So in the example of sit, when you're teaching a dog what sit means, you'd want to reward them at the moment that their butt hits the ground, or you'd at least want a marker word to mark that moment so they know that's what they're getting paid for.
Right. And another thing to add on that with like if we're talking about building a really strong foundation from the get-go and a really clear understanding of what sit means, when you're teaching that with a puppy, you're like you said, you're going to give the reward within the behavior that you want, not within the anticipatory state of mind that they are in before they get their reward or after their reward. So if you really want to make a sit, for example, really clear, you're not going to mark with your yes or your click when the dog is sitting and nose on the ground. That's not quite what we're looking for. A sit is sit and ideally look up at us. And then we're looking for that engagement and that understanding or stability within the behavior before we reward it. If a puppy has ants in their pants, that might not be the best time to reward because the dog is very unstable. They could literally be shifting and moving and tippy toeing around, but they don't understand quite why they're getting the treat. They're just excited and anticipating the treat. Another example that I see a lot of people do is rewarding their down inappropriately. Their lie down command, or down is just what I call it. A lot of people will get their dog in a sit first, then ask them to lay down, and then they get their cookie, and then they go to give it to their dog, and their dog pops up out of the down and is back in a sit, or they pop up all together and they're standing, and then they get their treat. And now that dogs are really easy to pattern train, you do that too much, your dog now thinks down means I put my butt down, then I lay down, then I get back up, and then they get their treat. And if you do that over and over, that's what the dog is going to think is what you're asking for. They're just trying to do what you're telling them to. They're just doing it wrong because you're telling it wrong and you're teaching it wrong. So stability within those behaviors is also something to look for. And there's also times when the dog's sitting, but they don't know what is what and what is down. Like they don't care to why they're getting the treat with the behavior. So that's an important thing of teaching them within that, why they're receiving that reinforcement. And they might not be able to grasp it the same way we do, but it is important for them to understand why they are getting that treat, not just this fictitious random treat that comes from the sky because God loves them and they want treats. Like very important for timing for the dogs to register what they did in order to produce that reward. And then we talked about high value and low value reinforcement and how to make sure that your dog does find value within what you're trying to give them to increase the likelihood that they're going to put their butt on the ground again or lay down again.
Yeah. Timing can mess up your training if your timing is not right. And that's why it's so important. So like, for example, we just did this yesterday with one of my clients. We're going on a walk. I do these little training meetups. So there are 3 of my clients there. And one of them, we're on a walk and her dog is just consistently getting in front of her. And she's looking up at her owner, but she's like tripping her and she's not able to really walk with her dog next to her like she wants to. Well, I noticed that as she's walking, every time she rewards her dog, in an attempt to be coordinated, she's walking, but then when she rewards the dog, she tells the dog, good girl, but then she stops walking. She has the dog stop walking. She has the dog sit in front of her and she pays her. So she's created this little happy hotspot in front of her where the dog thinks in order to get paid, the dog needs to be in front of her. So I had her shift and I'm like, hey, if you want your dog to walk nicely next to you, you have to reward her while she is walking nicely next to you. If you want to reward her from the dog walks on her, I think it's her right side. So she's going to reward the dog from her right hand on her right side while she is walking. So the dog learns that's the good spot. Yes. So even though she was rewarding her dog for walking, the timing of it was off and she was accidentally rewarding the dog for the wrong thing or the thing, not a bad behavior, but not the behavior she was trying to get.
Yeah. And that timing is important there, but placement is even more important in that example because like you said, the dog was just anticipating the place in which they're going to get their reward because that's the repetition and that's the pattern that that they had accidentally created. So like you said, instead of giving the treat in front, making sure it's on your left or your right side, ultimately just teaching the dog clarity, why they're receiving that treat in real time or the reward, the reinforcement, why they're receiving that in real time and what action they did that pairs with it. Timing and placement is huge.
And then another thing with the timing and using reinforcement is actually reinforcing the dog for the behavior that you want. Yes. So we're going to get into in our next episode, we're going to talk about how to phase food out. Because I know that when we're using food and dog training, everybody's always in a rush to phase it out. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for our next episode. But another thing that I see happen a lot is when people are trying to teach their dog a recall or a come command. They tell the dog to come, the dog comes. And then instead of paying their dog for coming to them, they add a requirement. They ask the dog to now sit. And then they pay the dog for sitting. The dog doesn't learn that they get paid for coming to you. They learn that they're getting paid for sitting. And that makes come not very valuable of a behavior. Right. Some dogs are going to, care less about that. You're super food motivated, super handler oriented dogs. But some dogs, it's like they're annoyed. They're like, oh, you call me to you and then you're going to make me work even more. That we have to break down those steps and just create a lot of value in coming to you at all. Then we can add another step later. So another thing that we already kind of mentioned, but now I do want to dive into is something called the Premack principle. So those listening to us don't actually need to remember what this is called, but I pulled it up on my phone so I could read the actual definition to people before I butcher it. But the Premack principle is one of my favorite things to teach with. So the Premack principle is a psychological reinforcement principle that states that you are more likely to do a less preferred behavior if you are rewarded with a more preferred behavior afterwards. So this is one of my favorite things to teach with, and it's really just expectations, right? So think of it like the behavior that you want is the gateway drug to the behavior that your dog wants to do. So before I let my dogs out in the backyard to run around and play, I want you to sit at the back door. Sit, I open the slider. Their reward is that they get to go out and play. Same thing with we go on a walk. You're going to sit at the front door so I can make sure the mailman's not out there and it's safe. Once you sit, we'll go on our walk. My shepherd's favorite thing in the world is sniffing. Like I will never compete with the smells out there with his incredible nose. But when we're on a walk, I have him heel, and his reward for healing is that periodically I give him the freedom to go sniff his heart out and pee on the tree and be a
Right.
dog. And then he comes back to a heel, we heal a bit, and we do it again. So rewards they are most obvious and clear when you're using something immediate, but especially when you get into those higher levels of training where your dog knows the basics and now you're trying to build them. Giving your dog the opportunity to do what they want to do is a really good reward that you
Mhm.
might not be able to encapsulate into just a cookie.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I wrote down some common questions and concerns that I hear a lot about reinforcement. And these are not necessarily going to be food specific because remember, guys, we're doing a whole episode on using food in training next. But I wanted to I just see these a lot and I wanted to get your take on them so that we can help some people out. So, what does someone do if their dog doesn't seem to be motivated by anything?
Dogs all have some form and levels of motivation. Every single dog does, some more than others, obviously. So if I hear that their dog is not motivated by anything, there's two things that are immediately going to cross my mind. One, there's potentially maybe an underlying medical issue that is undiagnosed, and that is decreasing, say, their energy or their desire to be interactive and run around and play or eat or be affectionate, or that dog has an excess of all of those things within like a free buffet style. I kind of call that just no rules, no limitations, all free. Dog has full access to house, couch, bed, toys, food, people, like free access to things they have an excess of. I'll definitely be more inclined to think the dog has too much. Therefore, they value all of that very little. And
Mhm.
that's kind of a harder reform program, like a training reform program, to take some of those freedoms and value within those things away so we can give it back and bring value back to it, but with control from us. So,
That's one that I see more often than I would like to is
yeah.
dogs who have everything.
Mm.
So things are only valuable if they're scarce, right? And
Right.
I know scarce can be a harsh word to use. I'm not saying starve your dogs, but if your dog has, I had this one little dog, he was so cute that I was working with several months ago that wasn't super food motivated, wasn't really like, it's kind of, we ran into this. Like he's not motivated by much. He
Yeah.
loved to bark and lose his absolute mind at the window. But everything else, because that was really, we were trying to solve that. We couldn't motivate him. And when I first got there, I look at his toy bin right next to the sofa in front of me. I'm like, wow, he's got a lot of toys. There was probably 50 toys in this bin. And she goes, oh, that's like one of five. She had hundreds of toys for this dog. I'm like, well, no wonder he's not toy
Yeah.
motivated. There's so many to choose from. It's
Yeah.
kind of like imagine, so like I really like cheesecake. But if I could eat cheesecake at every single meal, every single day forever, I'm not going to want cheesecake anymore. You couldn't pay me
Mhm.
anything with cheesecake because I'm like, no, I'm sick of cheesecake.
Right.
So when you find those things that your dog really likes, be very strategic in how you use them. So Sam and I will definitely talk about play one day, but like I categorize my dog toys into two different categories. There's the play with me toys, the toys me and my dogs play with together, the frisbees, the tennis balls, the tug toys. And then there's like the go find your own fun toys, the toys that the dogs have on their own, the chew toys, the Kongs, things like that, right?
Lower
Um,
value.
yeah, Grimm's got his big red soccer ball that he likes to thrash around on his own, but I don't play with that. He does. So the toys that I want to use in training, primarily Grimm's frisbee, because he's a big frisbee dog, that only comes out when I am playing with him and for very short periods of time. Like I will play frisbee purposefully. We add training into it. And I will end that game before he is sick of it because I want him to go, oh, I wasn't done yet. So he wants to play more next time. I don't leave 5 million Frisbees out because then he's like, I don't need your Frisbee. I've got 50 of them over here.
Mhm.
So people need to be a little bit more strategic in the resources that they provide to their dog. I want your dog to have toys and freedom and affection and all the things, but too much now just means your dog thinks they own everything and they don't want anything.
The dog will
That
expect more that way as well. When they're given more, they expect more. And
Mhm.
then you can definitely see some behaviors fall out, or maybe some like shifty attitude from the dogs when we try to control that and take them away. And they're like, no, 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 that's mine. You don't touch that. And then that's when we have more issues within that. But yeah, I have lower value toys that like you said, the Easy Calm. And those are toys that I'll interact with a little bit with Tip specifically, because she's just a nut job for toys. But the other three, Moose will grab a ball. He won't chase a ball in the house though. Like I
Yeah.
could throw it and he'll bump and get it and then go lay down with it and he won't bring it back. The older boys, they don't play with toys. Unless it's a brand new like stuffy toy. Wiggles is all about it. But other than that, they don't play with toys. So I don't have issues with like the resource guarding of bones and toys in the yard and stuff, because they find them they have access to it all the time, that it is not valuable, which is a little backwards in what we just talked about. But because they have unlimited access to those low value toys, they aren't even valuable. So they don't even cause issues within my dogs.
Yeah. You said something interesting though that I think a lot of people wouldn't pick up on. You can recognize that a brand new stuffy toy has value. So
Yes.
sometimes for our pet owners listening, you do need to be a little strategic like that and go, okay, well, just the toy that's been laying on the floor forever isn't. But like I remember I did a lesson once in this like outdoor shopping plaza, and the little dog Charlie, I love Charlie. There was a pet store. And we went into the pet store and his owner bought him this new little crinkly squeaky light toy. She now brings that to our training meetups, and the only time he gets to play with it is when he's there. So that toy has a lot of value. So for
Cool.
the people listening, you can either, pick one toy or pick a couple toys that your dog loves that they only get to play with you. But even for just those other toys, the go find your own fun toys, the enrichment toys that you have at home, the more they sit out, the more boring and less valuable they are. So if you have a bunch of toys, a really simple solution is pick two or three, leave those out, put the rest away, put them in a bucket in the closet. In 7 days, switch those toys out for a different three. Leave those out for 7 days, switch them out for a different three. Now you don't even need to ever buy a new dog toy because you're just rotating your toys out on a weekly schedule. And by the time week 4 or 5 comes around, those three that were out the first week, they're valuable again because they haven't
Yeah.
seen them in 5 weeks.
There's
So,
there's a luxury and novelty when we're using reinforcement with dogs as well.
yeah. Another thing that I think we should consider when a dog doesn't seem motivated by anything. Yes, health. Yes, if they have an overabundance of resources. But another is confidence building. A dog that's not very confident in themselves is not going to be motivated by play or exploring. They might not even have the confidence to go sniff things. So
Mhm.
usually if health is good and it's not an overabundance, then I'm going to go to confidence building. Okay, well, let's make sure the dog is confident enough to even walk to you and take food out of your hand. Because there's one little dog that I'm working with right now. We postponed his training program by a lot just to have them work on the confidence of him taking food from them because he was too nervous to even do that.
Yep.
So confidence building is a big one too.
Yeah. You can use leverage within the dogs who require more confidence. You can use leverage in your reinforcements to add fuel or a little bit of gas pedal to the dogs. Um, but it's tough with those dogs because when they have a mindset of they can go without, they'll easily put that block up in their head. Like, for example, food. Sometimes the easiest thing that we test when we're trying to build food motivation or just build engagement and interaction with food and the relationship and working for it and all that is a simple treat chase game. I'll keep a couple treats in my hand. We want the dog to either follow it in front of us or in front of us to us. We want to see if the dog will chase a lure, or chase some form of motivation. And if a dog gives up within a couple steps, like, no, I don't want that, or they don't even try at all, that's something else that we have to dig deeper into. Why the dog doesn't want to, why is it not motivating? How can we make it more motivating? How can we switch it? Um,
something. So to kind of circle back a little bit and just blend things for our pet owners listening. Sometimes, because I do work with a lot of anxiety and fear, I like working with our fearful dogs. I don't like that they are fearful. I want to fix it, but I enjoy
Yeah.
that type of training. So if I have a dog that is really just unsure about me, because with the fearful dogs, I'm brand new, I'm coming into their house. If they're not my first lesson of the day, I smell like a dozen dogs. If
Mhm.
they're really nervous of me, but they will take food, just not from me, sometimes I'll start with this little game with them where I'll sit on the floor, not staring at them, not facing them. And if the dog takes one step in my direction, it does not need to be close from me. They could be 50 feet from me, but if they take one little step in my direction, I will toss food behind them, so farther away from me. There's two rewards. There's the food reward, but there's also the reward of space. I don't
Mhm.
need you to come closer to me because if I add on the social pressure of come here, come on, come closer, and I'm coaxing them, they're not going to want anything to do with me. That's
And
now
by
I'm
the way,
adding pressure.
yeah,
So when they step to me, I will throw food farther away so they actually have to walk away from me. So they get space and they can shake it off and they can decompress. And then when they're ready, they take one more step to me and I do the same thing. I throw food behind them. I want me to be the magnet that is drawing them closer, but then I'm actually going to throw food farther away, kind of like
yeah,
a game of opposites.
yeah.
I'm almost like, I want you to go away from me, which makes them want to come closer to me because I'm not a threat.
Yeah, it gives them an opportunity to disengage from the stress of the situation they're in for whatever reason, like that radius that example you're talking about, a dog at a certain radius away from you. It gives them an opportunity to get farther and it makes you in their mind a little bit less scary. You're literally like smaller in their brain. You're less of a worry or thought. And it gives them an opportunity to have that mindset and then go back to the scary thing. And that's something that they chose to do. That wasn't something we asked them to do. So they opted to close in on that radius and get closer to you. So in and of that action and choice that they made, that's a small little way to show that the dogs can overcome their fear.
Yeah,
And
and it's just a small way to add space as a reward,
yeah,
like an example of that. And it
abs-
doesn't always have to be as dramatic as the dog's afraid of me or afraid of the person with the food.
just
Um,
nervous.
yeah, like I remember one time I took a puppy out on a field trip in like it was in downtown Littleton, and there's this funny little statue of like a little kid, and the puppy was afraid of it. A lot of people would be tempted to coax their puppy closer to the statue with food. I threw food farther away. So every time he took a step towards the statue, I'd throw food farther away from the statue just to get him comfortable with, hey, there's no pressure here. You don't have to walk up to it. But if you walk towards it, food and stuff is going to appear over there. And the next thing you know, he's walking right up to the statue, like, oh, this isn't
Right.
so bad.
Yep.
So just kind of an example of how you can use space as a reward too.
Yeah.
All right, I have another question for you, or another common question or concern. Can reinforcement be used to get rid of unwanted behaviors or just to build new behaviors?
Reinforcement,
Mhm.
it only builds.
So language is really important. And I asked this tricky question on purpose because I
Yeah.
like to take the stigma out of balance training and, all the
Right.
word that get a lot of stigma, right? So in our force free communities, we'll often hear, nope, reinforcement can fix everything. And we just want to be very clear about what that means. So in the question, can reinforcement be used to get rid of unwanted behaviors or just to build new behaviors? It can, but it's by building up an alternate behavior.
Right. And
So
you have to reinforce and reward that alternate behavior so much more heavier than the reinforcement that the dog gets of the other behavior, whether it's a self reinforcement or it is just something that they find that they've learned is fun.
it's just a language thing that's funny. It's like
It is.
technically the only way you can get rid of a behavior is punishment, but you can build an alternate behavior. So
Yeah.
when your trainer comes into your house or you go to the training facility or wherever and you're trying to fix a problem, your trainer might opt to address the behavior head on and go, no, we really need to tackle this specific thing. Or
Right.
they might go, no, we're going to teach your dog something else. So just kind of teaching people how to think like trainers a little bit, my pop quiz for them.
And I think both of those options are correct when dealing with problem behaviors, dealing with the behavior head on, as well as giving the dog further clarity and further information of how they can better advance their situation or environment through reinforcement. Reinforcement drives behavior. Absolutely. Reinforcement history drives behavior too. That's an important thing to keep in mind.
Dogs are always going to look to where they have found reinforcement in the past to find it again. So when you're, going back to our previous example, when your dog is so used to just pulling you to sniff the grass, it's going to be hard to break that habit because up until, let's say you have a 3-year-old dog that's doing this, and for the 3 years, they've been rewarding themselves by sniffing the grass and dragging you. You have 3 years of a habit to break. It's very
Yeah.
breakable. You can fix it, but it's not going to happen at the snap of a fingers. And a lot of people get discouraged. The reason that's happening is because there's such a strong reinforcement history of your dog being able to pull you over to the right side or whatever side. So
Yeah.
you want to create a new history of your dog being rewarded next to you or whatever your reward is that you're using there. So
Right.
when you're rewarding your dog, it's not as simple as I rewarded them twice for this. Why is it not
Why aren't they
a
doing it?
reliable
Yeah.
behavior
Why aren't they
then?
doing it all the time?
Yeah. You have to build a habit and then that habit needs to turn into muscle memory in order to phase it out of, luring your dog or bribing your dog essentially, which we'll talk about next time.
One of my favorite things to ask my clients or pet people or just dog people in general, why does a dog do what they do?
Is
Why
a
does a
hard
dog
pill for the hard pill for people to swallow that it's not because their dog loves them.
correct? Why does a dog make those choices that they do? Hate to say it, it's not because they love you so much that they would do anything for you. Dogs are quite selfish creatures. Dogs will always do the thing that feels good to them, even in our objective eyes, if it's a bad thing. Jumping on guests, jumping on the mailman, jumping on counters, chasing after cars, whatever. Dogs are going to do things that feel good to them, even especially if it is going to advance their situation or environment and further produce their outcome, the things that
Mhm.
they want to do.
Dogs can be a little manipulative too. I will say the same thing to my clients. Why do dogs do what they do? And they say, because my dog loves me. And I'm like, nope, that's not it. Dogs are selfish. And I always have the person that goes, no, but my dog really does seem to do this because it makes me happy. It's not usually because it makes you happy. It's because making you happy makes the dog situation better.
Yes.
Dogs may learn not to do certain things because they know historically that when they do that, you get pissed about it. And maybe there's some
Mhm.
consequence there. So they're avoiding the consequence. Or they know that if they walk up to grandma and they paw at her and jump on her, she's going to get a cracker off her plate and hand it to them. Or if I go jump on mom, sure, she's irritated, but she's touching me and giving me attention and she's no longer paying attention to the kids. So dogs may manipulate you because they know that offering a specific behavior is going to make their situation better, but it's never just because they love you and they want to make you happy. It's to make their situation better. And it's, we could use words like selfish, but scientifically speaking, we all know dogs are my favorite thing on the planet. I like them more than humans. But scientifically speaking, dogs have smaller brains than we do. They're
True.
less capable of complex emotions than we are. They're capable of emotions. There's a lot of emotions that they have. It's incredible what dogs can think and feel, but they don't have the bandwidth that we do to go, I'm just going to selflessly do this for you because I love you.
Right.
I will give it that science doesn't know everything and understanding what dogs are capable of is very hard. Like there are some stories out there where I go, that dog saved that kid and that's incredible and we can't explain it. But I'll say maybe 98% of the time when you're just at home trying to train your dog, they're doing it to better their situation. They're not doing it to make you happy.
Yep. When people start looking at behaviors that dogs do as those are choices that the dog is making, I think it might help reframe the mindset that their dogs have like, oh, my dog is so stubborn. Or my favorite thing is when people come home and they can just tell by the way that their dog is acting that they're so sorry and they feel so bad for what they did when the owner wasn't home. And the dog got in the trash and ripped couch up. You think your dog is actually sorry about that? They had the time of their life while you were
Mhm.
gone and getting in that trash and eating crap and throwing a cotton party. The batting of the eyes, the cutesy laying down and the little submissive paw and the rolling over and giving their belly and the eyes, the ears back. Like that's all appeasement behavior. They aren't sorry for what they did. They know that what they did produced an outcome that is going to upset you. They don't care that they upset you, but they are choosing those behaviors to hopefully lessen your reaction to their behavior.
Mhm.
And they're pretty good at it because their eyes are really cute and they'll try real hard. Because what do? We're suckers and we want to pet them. I don't when they do that kind of stuff. But will fall for it. And another example that I've heard from another trainer is in the human world, the boyfriend who constantly cheats on the girlfriend. Girlfriend finds out 10th time that he's cheated, and then he comes home. It's a big old fight, whatever. He goes to work. He comes home with chocolates and flowers and a massage certificate and like all of these appeasement behaviors because he is so sorry that he cheated on her. He's not sorry. He's using those tactics to lessen your reaction to their offense or their behavior.
Yeah. That's a really
Manipulation,
good analogy.
manipulation. And when
Yeah.
you can recognize that your sweet, precious angel baby dog, sweet baby that you cuddle with every night, that their actions are conscious, like they're choosing these things, not to spite us, but because it feels good and they don't have clarity from you that they're doing the wrong thing, they're going to keep doing these things.
Yeah. Another one that kind of falls into that category that maybe is not quite on the topic of reinforcement that we're talking about today, but that I hear often enough and just here is an appropriate place to fit it in is I hear this a lot where people will say, they went away for a few days, or maybe they were out at work longer than usual or whatever. And they're like, "Ugh, the dog, let's say the dog peed on the bed or the dog peed in
Um,
the house. Oh, she did it because she was mad at me. No, your dog was likely stressed because of a routine change, and the stress might cause that. But dogs don't do things just in spite of you. They don't
they
do
don't know
things
you had
to
to
make
stay
you.
at work for 3 extra hours because you have a deadline on a project that you have to
No,
meet.
they had to
They don't,
pee.
yeah, they don't recognize those things. They just know what feels good to them. And they knew that in this example, they needed to release their bladder
Yeah.
and their routine changed and they are able to. So guess what? They're
Yeah.
gonna pee.
Another thing that just really blows my mind sometimes is we tend to think of dogs as robots and not as like living beings with anatomy. So, like, people will say, my dog never has accidents in the house. Then you're at work for 20 minutes longer. Oh, my dog peed in the house out of spite of me. Maybe your dog just had to pee and you weren't
Mhm.
home to let them out. What other option did they have? And people,
Yep.
no, no, he knows better. He never pees in the house. I'm like, I don't know about you, but there are some days that I can go an 8-hour workday without needing to pee if I haven't drank a lot of water. And some days, for no reason at all, I have to pee every 20 minutes. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes you have to go, and they're animals and their bladders are not on a schedule. They might have gotten good at learning, there's the opportunity and I can hold it this long, but especially as they get older, they can't hold it as long.
Yeah.
So if your dog has an accident in the house, guys, just be nice to them, okay? It's probably not because they did it to make you mad. You need to be aware of it and recognize maybe you have a UTI that, your dog's getting, you need to address, or they're getting older and you need to adjust your schedule. Like my 15-year-old dog cannot hold it the way that he used to. When he has an accident, that's not his fault. He's old. I was out,
Yeah.
my husband's gone right now. I'm the only one home. So I got to let him out and I was out at work too long. So when your dog does something like that, it's not to make you mad. There's a reason for it. The reason might be stress. It might be that they just had to go to the bathroom, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It might be that it was fun. So, like getting into the trash, your dog doesn't do that to make you mad. They do it because it's fun and they were bored and the opportunity presented itself.
Yep. And it's important to recognize when it's a one-off behavior versus a consistent repeated pattern. The dog who continuously pees in the house uh, for X, Y, or Z reason when you're not home versus a dog that has an accident because you took too long to get home or whatever. There's there's a training and a management issue then. It's not your dog being defiant. They know that peeing feels good. And sometimes it could be that they mark or that they're just relieving themselves. But then you have a management issue. And
Yeah.
and you have to control and manipulate that dog's environment when you aren't there to avoid that behavior of being able to be rehearsed.
Yeah.
That is how you're going to stop it.
Yeah. If my clients call me with something weird that their dog did and their dog's never done it before, a lot of the times I'm going to go, huh, that's weird. I wouldn't worry about it until it happens a second time. Maybe with certain things, we're going to set it up to try to prevent that from happening a second time, but
Right.
they're animals. They're not robots. So if
Yeah.
something happens once, it might just be a fluke. They had to pee. They didn't feel good. They were in all the stress has caught up with them and they had an exceptionally bad day. So they barked at a guy one time. That doesn't mean they're a reactive dog. It just means they had one bad day until it happens a second time.
Or a third or a fourth. And when you
Yeah.
can see it, when you see patterns repeating themselves, that is telling you something. Behaviors that
Yeah.
repeat themselves are a pattern.
Yeah,
Our job is to
exactly.
recognize patterns and break patterns and make new ones.
Yeah. I got one more question for you.
Okay.
How often should I use reinforcement in a training session?
I think that's a really hard thing to answer because it depends on what stage and level of training you're in. You should always use reinforcement, but I think it's just going to depend on what stage of training you're in and the dog's level of clarity of your expectations.
Yeah. To answer that as simply as I can, for maybe, let's say somebody finds out I'm a dog trainer and they ask me that question, but they're not my client that I have a training program for that I know where they're at their journey. The simplest way I can think to answer it is you
Always.
want to reward your dog as frequently as it takes for them to be successful.
Yeah.
So let's use a sit stay as an example. If you're teaching your dog, so your dog knows what sit means, they know it means put their butt on the ground, but now you're teaching them to stay in a sit, you might have to reward your dog every 10 seconds. If they're young, puppy brained, no attention span, just learning this skill, as you get better, you should be able to reward them less and less frequently.
Right.
Now, if we get to a point, because when we talk about food in our next episode, we'll get into phasing that out. If somebody is like, well, my dog knows this, where they're a pro at it, now they're just refusing to do it without a reward, that's a little different, but it's actually pretty rare that we get there. It's usually that you're being inconsistent in your training.
There's a
And we're
gap
not
in
getting
dog
there.
understanding.
Yeah. So as simple as we can, guys, if when you're out there training your dogs, you want to reward them as frequently as it takes for them to be successful so that they can build a good, strong habit. That habit can become muscle memory. Now we can start to phase rewards out.
And then your dog will still perform in the absence of the reinforcement. And then you have a behavior that is naturally rewarding just by the act of doing. And there's some dogs that you can spend 2 years reinforcing a sit and then 2 months, for example. And then at 2 years old, your dog forgot how to sit when really they forgot the value in it. So there are times where you might have to go backwards. You might not have to use training treats for years, but you might have to go back for a little bit and say, hey, remember this thing and remember how fun and rewarding it is and valuable that we can make it. Here you go. And then where you can phase it out again. There's dogs that go through that ebb and flow. But if your foundation and training expectations from the get-go are pretty clear, you can use reinforcement for funsies versus I need to convey a message and reinforce the stability in this behavior.
All right. So that is what we have for a reinforcement episode. However, knowing that food is one of the most common ways that people train their dogs, we're doing a whole episode on food training next. So stay tuned for our episode next week. In the meantime, if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, I will put a link in the show notes where you can go to a Google form to let us know there, or you can find us on Instagram or TikTok at On Dog Terms. You can find my business on Instagram or TikTok at MJ_the dog trainer. And Sam, where can they find you?
Facebook Canine Insight LLC. I have a personal TikTok called Sammy Pants. I post some dog stuff and less like businessy training videos, but some fun stuff. Don't follow
Let's
me.
try
there.
Sam says, don't
So,
do that. I told you
I'm-
it, but don't follow me.
I don't have much going on there. It's not. If you're looking for information and like training stuff, go to MJ. They do TikTok for fun.
All right, guys, we will see you next week, or we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.